Well, I have to say I'm overwhelmed at the response. This is so exciting. When we talked about my UNH career, well, here we have my UNH former boss sitting right here, John Krause. I haven't seen him in 40 years. And we have not changed, right? No. I'm glad we got that straight. I know. And of course, all my WDH buddies all around. Yay, yay, yay. Oh, and my daughter has arrived. This is Shannon. Oh, she's going to take pictures. And I assume my granddaughter back there, my little granddaughter. That's Samantha. My grandson Derek is next to her. My granddaughter Alicia is over here. And her friend Chris back there. And my husband Frank is over there. So that's kind of my little family. Yeah, the dogs couldn't make it, but it's okay. Anyway, and I'm have to also thrilled to see some of my writing group have come, and I'm going to say why. And they're sitting here. This is the writing group on this end of this table. So I have to ask one question. How many have actually read the book through? So about a third to almost a half. So I don't want to give anything away, because I know Melissa hasn't finished, right? And then lots of people haven't finished. Well, that's fine. And some of you haven't started. So I want to tell you, Caroline, parent in the back, asked me, why did I write a novel? And how did I get into writing novels? Well, I never actually planned writing a novel when I started. As you know, most of you, I retired from Wentworth-Douglass Hospital. I had the best job they ever had, and it still is the best job I could have ever wanted. And after that, I wrote, as I mentioned, a history of the hospital, and that was kind of a fun project. It was basically, I had been a reporter, and I generally wrote nonfiction. So when I was writing that book, I actually had joined this writing group. It's the Jewett Writers Group. And the experience there has been incredible for me to continue writing, but learning a whole new style of writing. And it's a novel. Most of the people in my writing group, not all, Susan, you're not a poet really, but some of them are poets and authors, and many memoir, as you've written, and life experience that Marianne's done. So they're amazing writers, and I always feel like I'm in the presence of great people when it's an amazing thing. So when I was writing my history book, and you know, history can be maybe slightly boring, but Tony probably doesn't think that, right? History is exciting. So I wanted to make my book more interesting. And so I was talking with my writing group friends, and I decided to bring the founder of Wentworth-Douglass Hospital, Grace Stetson, to life in my history book. So it starts with Grace walking around the hospital. Of course, although people may think I was there in 1905 and 1906, I actually wasn't there when it opened in August 1906. So I put a little fiction. So I started writing a little bit of what she said and might have said. So I wrote the rest of the history, and at the end, I was in my writing group one time, and we somehow talked about writing, because I made that the prologue. I said, well, we're writing an epilogue. We'll bring Grace back to this current time. And that was certainly interesting, and I created a ghost of Grace, and she walked through the whole hospital and noticed all the new things, and she couldn't tell nurses from doctors anymore, because you know the doctors wore white coats and the nurses wore dresses with hats, and it had changed slightly. So that was fun. So I had a lot of fun writing about something totally different. So that's when I started. I walk every morning. I talked about this one time, and I said, you know, maybe I'll just dream up some story, but what would I write about? Well, they say, write what you know. So I've been a hospital spokesperson for 30 years, and I thought, well, I know a little bit about that. I know a little bit about hospitals and doctors and nurses and what happens in hospitals, and I thought, well, I could start there. So I created a character. Her name is Anne Delaney. And I'm going to read a little bit, and you can hear more about Anne. But Anne is pretty much me, as many people who have finished reading it will figure it out quickly. But it's about, she's a hospital spokesperson. And Anne, in the book, gets divorced. In real life, I'm perfectly married and happy and fine, thank you. But she meets, there's a story and I'll tell you about it, but the characters in the book, and I've said this to a few people, some of them are actual real people that I still know, and there's one character I named, and everyone that knows Alice Poole, well, when you read who Alice is, that is Alice. It's as much of Alice as I could put in the book, because I thought, you know, she deserves even extra thanks for all the good things she ever did for me. And she actually sent me a card. She was so touched that she wrote a nice note thanking me for doing that. And then I've told many people the book is semi-autobiographical. Actually, it's very biographical as far as parts of it are concerned. And, and I never realized how much until my sister, who lives in Virginia, read the book and calls me almost in tears. She said, I don't remember all that, but we did all those things, and we went to all those places. And when she finished the book, she called me back. She says, you know, I miss it. I miss your book. So there is one coming. So what I thought I would do, I'm going to answer anybody's questions when you have them, if you have them. But I thought I'd read it. And then since more than half probably haven't read it, I'm going to start at the beginning. Okay. Chapter 1. The mist rising from the depths of Niagara Falls soaked a group of tourists intent on capturing the majesty of the moment with their cell phone cameras. They maneuvered between other world travelers and slippery spaces to get as close as possible to the river's edge, daring elusive rainbows to stay in place until they had the perfect shot. I was just as wet as the rest of them on this early Friday morning, yet it was warm enough not to care about the drenching or the photo op. All I wanted was to resurrect the feeling, the roar of the falls, its power, and the scary possibilities of falling in. I love this place, just like the honeymooners and daredevils who thought they could survive its wrath. I understood Niagara's magnetism. I was born here. Memories bubbled up as I strode along the paths and bridges over the churning river I described as crazy water on similar walks, hand in my dad's. Those tall, tubby binoculars, once out of my reach, were still there, ready to get a close-up of the Cave of the Winds or of the Maid of the Mist swirling below us. The ping of the text message interrupted my reverie, reminding me that crafting the outbursts of an impetuous CEO and into positive news stories was more than a full-time job. Were the media slithering around corners again, looking for reasons to debunk the medical center's innovative surgery or animal research? I had kept them at bay for weeks and earned their respect, I thought. This late August day off was more than warranted. I shrugged at the thought of changing plans as I slipped my phone from my pocket. It read, "Call me." After a muffled "damn it," I turned around, crossed the bridges to the state park, and found an old iron bench away from the mist to call. The text was from Bob McCarthy, an abrasive reporter who wore wrinkled khakis with pride. In his mid-20s, he looked years older. I had met him a few months ago wearing his Buffalo News press badge and wondered what had happened to the paper's once strict dress code. It was the Buffalo Evening News when I had worked there as an intern, and Bob wasn't born yet. After my internship, I chose a job in Boston as a medical reporter, followed by a career in hospital media relations. I never thought I would leave until 6 months ago when I accepted the offer to become vice president of public affairs for a hospital on Grand Island. I left New England and all that I loved about living there: crisp autumn days, ocean breezes, and mountain hikes. It also meant leaving the loneliness of a recent empty nest and a charred marriage. Until I visited the Milton Center for Advanced Orthopedic Medicine, I considered Grand Island a flat, unmemorable space between Niagara Falls and Buffalo. In only 3 years since its founding, this multi-million-dollar medical mecca had earned accolades for its innovative bone and joint repair, despite Bob McCarthy's relentless efforts to tarnish its reputation. He roamed hospital hallways and monitored ambulances on the lookout for skeletons and gore, convinced doctors and hospital administrators were charlatans. I held my breath every time the sloppy reporter appeared, avoiding whiffs of his stale cigars and unfounded accusations. He loitered in staff-only restricted areas as if he belonged. When he was on a story, he was relentless. For someone who could write lengthy diatribes, his two-word text annoyed me. I sat back on the hard bench, took a breath, and called the inquisitor. He answered on the first ring. Hey, Delaney, I need to talk to your boss. Your hospital's hiding a few things. Infection rates are off the charts, animal blood is everywhere, and Dr. Stratton butchered one of your patients. If not more, and don't give me that HIPAA argument, patient confidentiality evaporates if docs are murdering people. I have solid sources and the dead patient's wife is talking. Could this be a cruel joke? Bob wasn't a funny guy. His glib suggestions of murder and mayhem caught me off guard. If he had slapped me in the face, I would not have been more startled. Hey, Dal, are you there? I found my lost voice and remembered my job was to talk to the media, including Bob. Good morning to you too, Bob, I said, ignoring the urge to respond. The urge to respond to his ludicrous comments. Every word I uttered would be published on the next news cycle. Instead, I chose one question. Who's the patient? We're running the story on Monday, front page. Tell Mr. Football to call me. He hung up. Damn you, Bob McCarthy, I shouted at a blank cell screen, already conjuring the distraught face of my boss, Scott Marino, AKA Mr. Football. As I reeled off the reporter's bloody accusations, Scott was the CEO of the Milton Center. We had worked together before at a smaller hospital near Boston. A respected leader, he looked somewhat out of place in the corner office and more at ease on a football field, ready to barrel into an opponent. He gave up the game years ago, but continued to tackle any opponent of his policies and decisions. A tinge of gray in his thick, wavy hair gave him an air of elegance, despite the shadow of a dark beard bristling below his olive skin. Scott loved attention, and the battle of running a hospital, it was my job to keep him focused and away from news hounds intent on trouble. The magnitude of Bob's call settled in as I tried to convince myself the highs and lows of this job were normal. I pocketed my phone, glanced at the rushing water while thinking about the Milton Center. A rocky plunge awaited at both. On my walk back to my Fall Street apartment, I mentally erased plans to hunt for a bungalow with enough room for my vagabond daughter. The city, yes, my vagabond daughter. Please note, she's here. Yeah. The city of my youth had changed. Urban development had spread through the oldest neighborhoods, replacing worn homes, including that of my parents, with cinder block buildings and placid parks. Niagara Falls, New York was in transition, as I was, suffering from the harsh reminders of better days. Hopeful endeavors such as the new culinary school and the Seneca Niagara Casino and Hotel suggested a brighter future. I hoped I'd made the right choice. I entered everything Bob said, adding the football jab, into my phone's notepad and called Scott. That's chapter 1. Now I can read another, or we can answer questions. What would you like me to do? Yes.
What's your second novel about?
You don't know what the first one's about. The second one will continue the main character, Anne Delaney. And Scott, if you've read it, I have to ask people if they like Scott or not, but maybe I shouldn't do that yet. He will be in that as well, and Dr. Milton. And it goes, and there's a mishap in the hospital, imagine, and someone dies. And at the end, you'll find out what happens. How's that? Yes, Susan.
I'm wondering if, I know you've written to publishers or agents or others. I'm just wondering if you've gotten any kind of response from them.
Zero. Zero. I have probably, and Tony probably knows all about this, I have queried and sent synopses to probably 40 or 50 different places, easily. And even the guy that runs our group, Brian, had friends, so he's sure they would respond. Zero. It's like nothing happens. So that's why I went into the process of, first I took some lessons or online courses on self-publishing. And then I went through the process and I ended up, as you know, self-publishing through Amazon, which was an amazing process. It was a little tricky. Not so much, I mean, first of all, I have to write the book. That's the biggest thing. And it did take me a long time. It took me about a year to write, to actually just sit down. And I do sit down, if you know the difference between a pantser and a plotter, or planner, I don't know if anybody knows, but pantsers sit down and just write. Stephen King is an example who does that. And I'm not equating myself to him quite yet. And then someone like Dan Brown, everything is laid out, plot, 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 and then he fills it in. So I'm sort of more of the sit down and just go and write. And then I kind of work on putting it all together in the end. I'm not quite sure what that's called. But first you have to write the book. And then you have to rewrite it about 40 times, if not once. Because there's some of you, Susan was one, actually Jerry was one, read it very early on. And I would think you might have seen a few differences in the final version. Because I had a lot to learn. I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to write a novel. And the first thing I struggled with was dialogue. And Susan's so good at dialogue. And I was like, just writing press releases is what I was doing, which wasn't really not dialogue. So I had to struggle to get that part done. And then I had a lot of people read my book. Thank you for all of you. And they gave me great feedback. Jerry gave me feedback, and he says, we had them going across the bridge in Niagara Falls to Niagara Falls, Ontario, and I didn't have them showing their passports. He says, you know they have to have them show their passports. I said, okay, Jerry, I got that. I mean, there's little, the trickiest thing, some of the stuff that you don't think about when you're creating characters and you're creating places and they're doing things. And I took one of those master courses my daughter gave me for Christmas. One was by James Patterson. And it was very clear. If you've read his books, this book is short chapters as well. And he writes very short chapters. One of the things he said, make sure you are in the place when you're writing. In other words, sitting in the room or standing, you got to remember where you are. Otherwise, you get all mixed up. And I had trouble with that, logistically getting the people in the right place if they were sitting or standing or walking in or if they even in the room. So that was something I had to learn. And the dialogue part. Description I was okay with, but it took a little effort, and it's why it took me so long. And then in the very final, I did hire an editor and then when I did that, I didn't touch it again, because I could still fix it, I'm sure. I could still redo this again. But I won't. I'll write the other one, the next one.
You know that there's a long history of people with lots of rejection notices.
I know, I didn't even get rejected. I didn't get anything. If I send it to you, John, would you have rejected me? Probably.
So it was just nothing. It disappeared into...
Yeah, it went into cyberspace or something. Yeah, Caroline.
Well, as an artist, when you're coming out of space, what you're saying, like, your point of view is very important in visualizing it. Can you visualize now that you've written books, movies or theater or film?
You know, that's funny. My son, who is not here, by the way, make note. Well, that was his first comment because he did read my Facebook post. He says, he wants to work on the movie. He hasn't read the book or anything, but he wants to do the movie. So one of the things, when I'm writing it, it is like a scene. It's like thinking of creating scenes. And there's some instances in the book that are more obvious to me, like a scene. I read one for Rotary, the one about the bar scene, which is my favorite one. funny. I had fun. I laughed so hard writing this stuff some days. It was, I could cry some days, but no. But that's like writing a scene to me. I don't know how to describe that, but and then when I wrote that one, I still remember Susan's telling me, well, you haven't got enough in there. I mean, you ought to fix it up. She's divorced, she should feel worse, and and I'm not divorced, so I'm like, okay, I'll try and pretend I'm divorced. How does that feel? And that was fun too, pretending I was not married. By the way, some of you have read some of this, you might know what I mean by that. Yes. Okay, anything else? Yeah, Marianne. Oh, I did an online search, and I ended up looking at a lot of background on the editors. And the guy that I chose, his name is Jim Davies, and his background, he was an editor for a Chicago newspaper. And he worked with hospital public relations departments. I mean, it just seemed to fit. And I looked at a lot of them. I read what they did, I read their reviews, and I chose him. And I think he did a good job. It's awkward, though, for me, because if you know anything about style, there's the AP style of writing, and there's the Chicago manual style, and he used Chicago, and I'd never used that, and it's very different. For instance, numbers. Numbers are numerals. It doesn't matter if they're under 10 or over 10, if you know that rule. There's a lot of rules. He doesn't use those rules. So I was a little concerned at first, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to go with this. And he uses serial commas, lots of serial commas. Kathy loves serial commas too, right? But it was worth it. I felt comfortable because as many times, I know Kathy's read it, a lot of people read it and gave me feedback, but I changed it so many times that I needed to have it final edited. So I did that. Yes, any other questions?
I assume you had to pay him.
Oh, yes, I did. A lot of money. Yes, I did. Do I know how much? I'll say it was over 1,000 and less than 2. No, it wasn't bad. If you're looking for editors, copy editors, there's lots of editors, copy editors, line editors, a lot of things. Usually it's 2 cents a word, average, more or less. And there's 90,000 words in my book. So think about that. That's when I wish it was shorter, but actually it was much longer. I took sections out. That's the hard part. I wrote these great things, and then I somehow said, it's not fitting. It just, even though I love what it is, and I saved them still. I still have them all. But maybe I'll use some in a different, the new book. The new book. Lots of people want to know if the characters are modeled after people I know. And they are. Yes, Nancy?
Already into your second book. Maybe your third book could be done with James Patterson.
There you go. I mean, he's had Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton. I mean, why would he want to do it with me? Oh, of course. Thanks, Nancy. Dan Brown's nearby. I actually physically ran into Dan Brown one time walking across the street. And yeah, I didn't know it was him at the beginning. But then I realized after he walked, we were going to a restaurant. And suddenly I sat down and I thought, why does that guy look familiar? And then I finally said, I know, it's Dan Brown. I should go run down there and get his autograph or something, but I didn't. Yes, Mary?
Another editing question, because we've heard so much of it in the writing group, I'm just curious, was there anything that just kind of stood out from your process of working with the editor that he changed or, modified? That's, anything that stood out?
There wasn't anything major. There were a couple instances I used the wrong word completely and didn't realize it. There's a part where I had clicking glasses. It's clinking glasses. He caught that one, and I'm like, good, because it's spelt right. Spell check would work. Everything else worked. That was the wrong word. and I can't remember, there's one other wrong word, or not the best word. It was fairly straightforward. Most of the editing was taking commas out, putting commas in. You know, there were lots of those. Ellipses, I love ellipses. You know, it's so much fun to just dot, 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 and then you know, write something. But then you gotta either end the sentence or put a semicolon, or you gotta figure out what to do with that sentence. So I tried to get rid of most of those. But when I'm writing, I sometimes do that because I don't really know the end of the sentence yet. So I have to kind of go back. Anyway, yes. So does anybody recognize anyone in the book that they know? There's somebody like Sheila in my book. Did you know that, Sheila?
She was very mature.
I
I was very appreciative of that, Noreen.
I didn't say she was mature. Did I say she was mature? I thought she was unbelievable. No. Her name was Meredith, and everybody reads about Meredith. When I wrote that person, I thought of Sheila. Even though it wasn't your job, she was the head of emergency, but I put you there anyway. It wasn't, they didn't have an emergency. This is another thing. Dr. Roger Evans, some of you know, in the book is Ian Rogers. I played with him, and it's pretty much him. He was kind of fun. He was one of my readers. He was great, so I appreciate that. And one of the things that when I wrote the whole thing, and I knew this, I had this funny feeling that I should either figure out how to handle this. I had an intensive care unit. Trish, you'll think about that. And really wouldn't have an intensive care unit in a specialty orthopedic hospital, would you? No. So what I ended up doing to make it all work is I made it a special orthopedic hospital that does orthopedic trauma. So yes, so then it worked just fine. But, and Roger's the only one that read it that came up, you know, there's no ICU there. But I really wanted an ICU in that book because of, I don't know, you know, because of the tensions and somebody's in, I won't say if you haven't read the book, but somebody's in there, one of the patients, and an ICU and an OR, as you well and Trish both know, two Trishes here, is another world. So I wanted to take a part of that other world and get it in there somehow. And there's a part where in the beginning where I talk about going, when I was first on this job, and true, when I was first on my own job, I invited myself into the OR because I figured I'm going to write about a hospital. I ought to know about it. So I don't remember who took me in there, but I went in there and I was all bunnied up in the bunny suit and the whole thing and walking around. The first thing I ever wrote for the hospital as a publication was called Miracle Workers. And it was about surgeons. And I had every surgeon agreed to be in it. And one agreed, and then he backed out. And you wonder who that is that backed out? Paul Butler. Yeah. He wanted and then he didn't want to be in it. And he was back and forth. And even Batons was in it. And he was okay, even though he wouldn't smile in his picture. So, but when I went up there to spend time writing that, I actually sat in the nurses' lounge, or the lounge. And I always remember this. And there was boxes of crackers and a big thing of peanut butter. And I'll never forget that, this sort of communal peanut butter thing. And and I wrote that. It's still there, yeah, okay. Yeah, really? It's amazing. I mean, that was from real, when I really did do that.
So Noreen, you had some incredible experiences years ago with a certain neurosurgeon at Wentworth-Douglass.
Yep.
You had to go write about, deal with Connie Chung,
Yep.
et cetera. Or any of that woven through this book?
No, I didn't think I know what you're talking about, other than dealing with the media. I was very new to my job at Wentworth when that happened. Although the very first thing I had to deal with was the escaped convict who shot himself. Do you remember that? Benjamin Long was his name. I had only been there 6 months. And his guy was escaped from a prison in North Carolina. And somehow his girlfriend lived in New Hampshire, and they kept following him all through different states. and he ended up in Lee traffic circle, and he shot himself, unfortunately, but he didn't die. And he ended up in our ICU for 100 days. And the big part of, besides, he did die, but then they couldn't figure out who was going to pay for his medical care. But the thing that I remember, I had my first press conference, and I had never done anything like that. And one of our neurosurgeons had taken care of him. And so I had to set up everything like fast. And then AP reporter came into that. And as you know, high security. And there's a lot of security at hospitals, sometimes not. So come in, Arul. One of my favorite doctors in the world. So I'm talking about this patient, my first experience at Wentworth-Douglass handling media. And this AP reporter came to the press conference, and I could see him he was looking around, and somehow he figured out, he was trying to find out where the ICU was. So I caught him, and I thought, he's going to go up there. And I called security, and security was right on it. And they got him, and he was right at the door of ICU, going in there to take a picture or do whatever of this poor guy. And we got him out of there. He was so mad at me. He sent me some kind of letter saying, he had every right, and he didn't have any right. No rights, sorry, not in my hospital, you don't. So I dealt with a lot of interesting reporters. The Connie Chung one was shortly after that. And I talked to someone there, but in the end, and I often regret that we didn't have something rather than no comment. No comment is wrong. And I always had, ever after that, I always had a comment. I think it's important no matter what, to say something. There was a story long ago of a death in our hospital. And somehow they got a wind of it, and it was something that was a local story, but had national implication, and that was all it was. But and it didn't matter that much. I mean, I wasn't trying to be in the news, but the news was coming to me, so I had to handle that one. But that was early on. Yeah, we had, people think they need to know everything, and they don't really need to know everything. But they need something. They do need something, my opinion. Yes. No, I didn't. I know what you're talking about. The accident, how many people have ever been to Niagara Falls, Grand Island, or seen the bridges? So you know where those bridges are. And they're really old. The bridges have been there a long time, and they freeze. So somehow I was sitting there, I don't know why I thought of that. And I thought, this guy, Dr. Stratton, was supposed to be coming to see me in my office to explain a few things. And on his way, he's hit, should I tell you all this? Yeah. It gets in an accident. And I wanted it to be so that I could deal with him in a different way. I don't know how to explain this. I needed something to happen. One of the things when you're writing is you can't just, and if you've read books, and I can't do this, if a narration gets too long, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on, and nobody's talking and nothing's happening, that's the end of me. I'm not reading the rest of this. So when I'm writing, I have to have something happening. So I came up with that scenario of the accident. Then out of the clear blue, one day I was sitting there and I said, well, it's Niagara Falls, honeymoon capital. Maybe there's honeymooners in this accident. As it turned out, there were. And then that was tricky writing, because I had to remember there was an oil tanker that hits a car, and I had to remember what car hit what car and who was in the car and what kind of car it was. And I made it all up. But then I got so confused. I actually had to write down how many people there were, because I had to give a report to the media after that about the accident and the people in the accident and their ages, which I always did. I did a lot of those kinds of things in my job. So that was a little tricky. But I thought in the end I did it okay. It just took a while. That was a tough one. Some were easier than others, some of the scenes. And they're like Caroline said, it's like a scene in the movie. You can sort of see this happening.
And you're proud you never used the term fake news in this novel.
You know, because the title's Guilty News. Actually, in the second chapter, that's where you first heard the term Guilty News. This was not the name of the book to start with. The name for 4 years, I guess, was The Spokesperson. Because it was about a spokesperson. That was why I called it that. And I always thought it that. And then one day I was walking, and I said, you know, it just doesn't really, I wanted it to be about the news. It's about the book is about the media and dealing with the media. That's really what it's about. And it happens to be in a hospital. But it's about not so much the fake news, but the pushiness. And when you read it, you'll see the sense that some people in the media, I think many of them do a really good job, but stories are very biased. Every story, no matter who's doing it, has a bias. You can't help it. Because when I was a reporter at Foster's, they would say, we'd have a morning meeting and it was the budget. It's called the budget. And you sit in the office, and we used to sit there and, okay, these are the stories we're covering. Well, already we bias because we're only covering these stories and not these stories, whatever they are. So you've already introduced some kind of opinion in that, no matter what you do. Now, when I was a reporter, I tried to get both sides, you know, talk to someone from here and someone from here, and then somewhere in there, you get that information out. It's very difficult, but today you see reporters, you only hear one side, and way over on one side. And then you have to read some other publication to get the other side. It's very difficult to see balanced stories. And you also see media reporting with no names, according to a source. And I do cover that in this book. I don't like according to sources. I want to know who's the person. Tell me who that source is. Don't give me according to sources. And that happens a lot. When I first started at Wentworth-Douglass, Foster's had a dedicated reporter working there for hospital news. And that was a while ago, but they did. And I used to work with a lot of different ones. They changed very frequently. But I dealt with a lot of different people. And I have to say, most of them were younger. A lot of them were just out of school. But, and I dealt with some that were difficult to work with. As maybe you noticed, Bob here was a little difficult to work with. Yeah. Any other questions? Nothing? That's it? You all know the end? Do you want to get the end away? Do you want me to read my favorite chapter? You have to forgive Rotary friends that I'm going to do this again to you. Actually, I have another favorite chapter. It's a little longer. It's about this is also, Roger Evans told me I should have a map in here of where places to go, because it is a little bit of a Niagara Falls, tourist thing, where to go.
Do you have an agent there in Niagara Falls to help you sell?
I have a good friend she lives on Grand Island, and she is getting her book club there. I told you the cookbook book club, and they're going to feature my book, and they're going to do a discussion next month, and they've invited me by Zoom to come to that meeting. And their book club is part of a national book club, cookbook book club, and there's a lot about food in here, wine and food and other stuff. So, so I can read. You think I'd know where everything was, but not really. So I can read this again, or I can read a different one. I can read. Did you like it? Okay. All right. So I'll set you up. Anne is you heard that she has an apartment in a hotel, or you'll see what it is. It's a hotel apartment building in Niagara Falls where she has lived. She has moved. And she has this chapter. She's coming home after meeting with Scott, and this is where she's single and hasn't ever really ventured out to do much. So, the hotel wine bar was in happy hour mode. I was about to press the elevator button when I heard the mellow riffs of a jazz guitar mixed with wine-infused laughter. A few empty bar stools were waiting for my decision. I thought getting a divorce was a lot easier than getting single when I remembered a wise park ranger's advice. All you had to do to climb a mountain was to take one step after another. I pointed my toes in the right direction, zeroed in on my single stool, and willed my intestines to stop trembling. This was my first awkward step as a newly divorced woman into a bar alone. The closer I got, the more I wanted to run back to being married, safe, and unnoticed. I took a few minutes to adjust to the dark navy walls and subtle lighting that created ageless encounters. Lime green velvet sofas and zebra print chairs were tucked into the room's small alcoves, where tall windows framed the city lights. I slid onto a brass bar stool facing a mirrored wall lined with wine bottles from around the world. The lanky bartender was wiping martini glasses with a white cloth, watching me. My reflection was terrified. "What can I get you?" he asked. I tried to sound confident. Martinis were not my drink. Cosmos were for cosmopolitan readers, a publication I once read that still promoted itself as the women's magazine for sex advice. Maybe I should re-up my subscription. I was only 48. With a fully intact libido, all I needed was a partner and some courage. "I'll have one of your featured Chardonnays, not too oaky, thanks." "Got it," he said, pouring a perfect 6-ounce measure. He placed a small white paper napkin on the glossy bar, followed by the tall-stemmed wine glass. I swirled, sniffed, and tasted. It was good. I looked up at my reflection again as a handsome man with sandy hair joined it. He looked so much like Todd, I flinched. Todd is her ex-husband, by the way. "Hey, sorry to surprise you," he said as I turned around. "My name's Chuck. Haven't seen you in here before." "This is my first time. My name's Anne. Good to meet you." I extended my hand. He grasped it with a limp squeeze. The guitarist was at the end of the bar. His music was smooth and sensuous, his tones mellow, dark, and edgy. When his set was ended, the room chilled and felt empty. To fill the void, my new barmate began a lengthy monologue about his successful career in real estate law, his ex-wife, his ex-partners, and his extraordinary sailboat, pausing only for a swig of burgundy bravado and a quick look at himself in the mirror. "You should see her. She's 42 feet long, sleek, sumptuous, white leather seats, full bar, the best teak floors money can buy. I call her C's dream." That's the letter C, not the word C. "It's a play on my name," he laughed. "You'd love her." I sympathized with his ex-wife, hard to compete with a dreamboat. Perhaps there was a touch of Todd in this man. "She sounds incredible. Afraid I'm not a fan of boats, any size. They make me seasick." "Too bad. She's a beauty," he said, unfazed by my disinterest. "I'm sure she is. So, Anne, what do you do?" He wasn't giving up. "I'm a spokesperson for a hospital." I could see the question marks in his blurry blue eyes. "Is that it? I mean, are you a nurse or a doctor or something?" "I am something. I am a spokesperson." I thought he might move on to the next ageless woman in the bar, but he persisted. "So, what's it like being just a spokesperson for someone else, something else?" "You know, Chuck, it's a little like being a lawyer. I listen to opinions, analyze information, give people advice, and speak on their behalf." "Being a lawyer is much more complex," he said, puffing up his chest. "I give advice, but it's based on years of education, multiple degrees. I have an undergraduate in sociology, a master's in law, and a doctor of juridical prudence, science, actually. That last one from Harvard, plus years of experience. I tell my clients what's best for them, how to win. That's what I do. And I'm paid very well, more than a spokesperson. No offense intended. I could not help but wonder what this self-enamored master of the universe was doing in downtown Niagara Falls, New York, cruising a low-key happy hour. I was no longer anxious. I was pissed. You know, Chuck, I'll admit there's one difference. I don't boast about me. I boast about them. The overeducated, overpaid buffoon was silent. I finished my 6 ounces, paid the happy hour rates, left a hefty tip for the man wiping glasses, still watching me, and said goodbye to my ex-barmate. In the empty elevator, I shouted, "What a jerk," and smiled. I had made it through the singles bar scene, or at least I had taken the first step. Thank you. Thank you. Susan knows that well. We spent a whole session in my writing group talking about this. Yes.
I want to make a comment. I wrote a memoir about open adoption, and a couple of months ago I did my reading, and we had my book printed up at a local printmaker in Somersworth, and I had no idea how to price it, and I really didn't educate myself. I should have, but we went to the reading with 10 copies. I did the reading. Afterwards, I just said, hey, it costs us $8.50 to print them up. We'll take payment by donation. And people were so incredibly generous. I just want to say this book is worth a whole lot more.
Oh, Karen.
Write your checks big.
Karen is an amazing, amazing writer. She really is. She's absolutely amazing. Of all the writers, her memoir is just so touching about open adoption. And actually, there's a reference in this book because Anne's daughter in here is adopted, and you will see that. And I thought of Karen's story when I wrote about her. Yeah, very touching. Thank you. Yes, any other burning questions? No? I'm so glad you all came.